He stood before his congregation every Sunday, hands raised, voice trembling with holy passion. They called him a man of God, a shepherd guiding his flock toward salvation. But the truth? He was a wolf. And when the money ran out, he didn't just betray his faith. He sacrificed his own wife for cash. This is the story of a man who convinced his wife to let him destroy her legs for an insurance payout. A man who promised her security, and instead gave her a death sentence. Manipulation, murder, betrayal, twisted secrets. This is Vic's True Crime Stories, where the truth isn't just revealed, it's uncovered. The congregation saw a man of God, a beacon of righteousness standing tall in his pulpit every Sunday. Lincoln Frasier's voice boomed through the chapel, his words dripping with conviction as he spoke of faith, devotion, and the sacred bonds of marriage. Women dabbed their eyes with tissues when he preached about love. Men nodded solemnly when he spoke of sacrifice. They all believed every word that fell from his lips. But faith can be a mask. And Lincoln wore his better than most. Behind the closed doors of their modest home, where no parishioners could see, the real Lincoln Frasier emerged. The bills kept coming. The debts piled higher. The collection plate never held enough. He paced their bedroom at night, running fingers through his hair, staring at numbers that refused to add up. The church paid him in respect and admiration, but respect couldn't cover the mortgage. Admiration wouldn't pay the hospital bills from Danica's last illness. He needed real money. Fast. It started as a whisper in his mind, then grew into a constant hum. The insurance policy. That thick envelope with its crisp forms and promising numbers. $1.3 million. Enough to wipe every problem away. All it would take was sacrifice. Not his sacrifice, of course. That wasn't how Lincoln operated. He'd built his life on the sacrifices of others, their time, their money, their trust. Now he needed just one more. Danica sat at their kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, when he first floated the idea. Her eyes widened as he explained. Frostbite. A terrible accident. The insurance payout that would solve all their problems. Her fingers trembled against the ceramic mug. You want me to lose my legs? The words came out small, disbelieving. Lincoln reached across the table, capturing her shaking hands in his steady ones. Not lose, he corrected, his voice soft as Sunday morning sermon. Sacrifice. For us. For our future. He painted pictures with his words, the way he always did. A paid-off house. Financial security. Maybe even that beach vacation she'd always dreamed about. All it would take was 10 hours of courage. 10 hours of pain for a lifetime of comfort. The doctors see frostbite cases all the time, he assured her. They'll know exactly what to do. Danica stared at their joined hands, at her wedding band that had grown loose over the years. She thought about the children they'd never had, the way Lincoln's voice cracked when he talked about providing for his family. She thought about cold winter nights when they'd huddled together for warmth in their drafty first apartment. Most of all, she thought about trust. The kind of trust that makes you nod when every instinct screams to run. When she finally whispered, "Okay," it wasn't just agreement. It was surrender. The moment the word left her lips, something between them shifted forever. Lincoln squeezed her hands, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. You won't regret this, he promised. But promises are fragile things. And this one was already cracking at the edges. The bathroom tiles were cold against her bare skin when the time came. Lincoln laid out the dry ice with meticulous care, like a priest preparing sacraments. At first it just stung. Then it burned. Then the pain came in waves so violent Danica nearly passed out. Her screams echoed off the porcelain, raw and guttural. Lincoln held her wrists when she tried to pull away, his grip unrelenting. Think of the money, he urged, his breath hot against her ear. Think of how proud I'll be." 10 hours later, when he finally helped her stand on blackened, ruined limbs, Danica looked into her husband's eyes and saw something that chilled her more than the ice ever could. Not concern. Not guilt. Anticipation. The same look he got when the collection plate came around, heavy with offerings. She'd given him her legs, her mobility, her independence. And as the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, Danica realized with dawning horror that for Lincoln Frasier, it might never be enough. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and false hope when they wheeled Danica through those automatic doors. Her skin had turned the color of storm clouds, her legs stiff and lifeless as fallen branches after an ice storm. The doctors moved with urgent hands, their voices clipped and professional, until they got a proper look at the damage. Then their words slowed. Their eyebrows knitted together. They exchanged glances that said more than any diagnosis ever could. "This doesn't look like typical frostbite," the youngest resident murmured, gloved fingers hovering over the blackened flesh. The attending physician leaned in closer, his breath catching when he saw how the damage cut off in perfect lines around her ankles, as if someone had carefully painted the destruction onto her skin. "No," he agreed quietly. "This looks intentional." Meanwhile, Lincoln paced the waiting room, his polished shoes clicking against linoleum. He checked his watch every 30 seconds, not with worry, but with calculation. He'd done his research. He knew how long these things took. When the doctors finally called him into that small, windowless conference room, he was ready with his practice story: the failed camping trip, the sudden snowstorm, the heroic efforts to save his beloved wife. His voice cracked at all the right moments. His hands shook with what looked like grief. But doctors are trained to see through performances. And these men had seen too many real tragedies to be fooled by this manufactured one. While Lincoln spun his web of lies, Danica floated in and out of consciousness, each waking moment bringing fresh waves of agony. The pain medication made her thoughts sluggish, but one terrible truth cut through the fog: her legs were gone. Really gone. Not temporarily. Not until the swelling goes down. Forever. She tried to lift her head to see the damage, but the nurses gently restrained her. "Sure," they soothed. "You need to rest." But how could she rest when every nerve in her body screamed that something was profoundly, irrevocably wrong? 2 days later, when the insurance adjuster arrived, Lincoln greeted him like an old friend. He dressed carefully for the occasion, his best suit, the one he wore for Easter services. He'd even brought a file folder filled with meticulously forged documents. The adjuster, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, listened politely to Lincoln's elaborate story. He took notes. He nodded in all the right places. And then he slid a single piece of paper across the table. $7,200, the adjuster said, his voice devoid of inflection. "That's the maximum we can approve for this situation." Lincoln's smile froze on his face. His fingers twitched against the edge of the table. "That's impossible," he whispered. Then louder, "Do you have any idea what my wife has been through?" His voice climbed higher with each word, until he was nearly shouting in the quiet office. "She lost her legs. Her legs." The adjuster didn't flinch. He'd heard this act before. "The medical evidence suggests this wasn't an accidental exposure," he said calmly. "Our forensic team has questions. Many questions." He stood then, gathering his briefcase with deliberate movements. "You'll receive our full report within 30 days. Until then, I suggest you focus on your wife's recovery." Back at the hospital, Danica stared at the ceiling, counting the acoustic tiles over and over as if the repetition could somehow make sense of her new reality. The physical pain had dulled to a constant throb, but the emotional wounds were only beginning to fester. She thought about Lincoln's face when he'd visited that morning, the tightness around his mouth, the way his fingers drummed incessantly against his thigh. She'd seen that look before years ago, when a parishioner threatened to expose his affair with the choir director. It wasn't grief. It wasn't worry. It was the look of a man realizing his carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. When Lincoln finally stormed into her hospital room, his face was flushed with barely contained rage. He didn't ask how she was feeling, didn't touch her hand or smooth her hair like a loving husband would. He just stood at the foot of her bed, staring at the space where her legs should have been, his breath coming in short, angry bursts. "They're denying the claim," he spat. "After everything we did. After everything you went through." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. This was supposed to fix everything. Danica turned her face toward the window, where afternoon sunlight painted the walls gold. She thought about all the time she'd defended Lincoln to her family, all the excuses she'd made for his behavior. She thought about the way he'd held her hands in that bathroom, whispering promises as the ice ate through her flesh. Most of all, she thought about the question the night nurse had asked her earlier, when Lincoln was out of earshot. "Honey, did someone do this to you on purpose?" For the first time since this nightmare began, Danica felt something other than pain or fear. She felt clarity. Cold, terrifying clarity. Because looking at Lincoln now, at the way his eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal, at the sweat beading on his upper lip, she understood two things with absolute certainty. First, that he had known exactly what he was asking of her in that bathroom. And second, that a man capable of this kind of betrayal was capable of anything. Even murder. The heart monitor beside her bed began to beat faster as this realization took root. Lincoln's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. For a long, breathless moment, they simply stared at each other, the wife who finally saw the truth, and the husband who realized his mask had slipped. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The silence between them said everything. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. A cart rattled by. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary day in a place where nothing would ever be ordinary again. Danica closed her eyes, letting the tears slide silently down her cheeks. And Lincoln? Lincoln started making plans. Because in his world, there were only two kinds of people, those who served his purposes and those who stood in his way. And Danica had just moved from one category to the other. The hospital room was silent except for the steady beep of monitors keeping time like a morbid metronome. Danica lay perfectly still beneath starched white sheets, her body broken but her mind terrifyingly clear. She knew. After weeks of pain medication and hollow reassurances, the fog had lifted, and with it came the awful understanding of what her husband truly was. The way his eyes lingered too long on the pillow beside her head. The way his hands shook not from grief, but from something far darker. She wanted to believe she was imagining things, that the man she'd loved for years couldn't possibly be contemplating what she feared most. But when the night nurse left and Lincoln appeared in the doorway, the look on his face erased all doubt. He moved quietly, like a shadow given form, pausing at her bedside to adjust the foreline with practiced care. "You're looking better today," he murmured, his voice honey-smooth, the same tone he used when convincing parishioners to open their wallets. Danica tried to speak, but the drugs had left her throat raw. Lincoln smiled then, a slow curving of lips that never reached his cold, flat eyes. He picked up the pillow, turning it over in his hands as if examining the quality of the fabric. "So light," he mused. "You'd think something so soft couldn't possibly." His voice trailed off meaningfully. Danica's heart began to race, the monitor beside her bed betraying her panic with shrill, rapid beeps. Lincoln glanced at it, then back at her, his head tilting like a curious bird studying prey. "Shoo," he soothed, pressing the pillow against her chest with deceptive gentleness. "It's better this way. Cleaner." For one horrifying moment, Danica saw the truth in his eyes. Not anger, not hatred, but the calm calculation of a man balancing a checkbook. She was simply a liability to be erased. When the pillow came down, she fought with all the strength her ravaged body could muster. Her fingers clawed at his wrists, leaving angry red trails in their wake. Her legs, what remained of them, thrashed uselessly beneath the blankets. Lincoln simply leaned his weight into it, his breath coming faster now, not from exertion but from something perilously close to excitement. "It's almost over," he promised, his voice trembling with perverse tenderness. The last sound Danica ever heard was her own heartbeat stuttering into silence beneath the suffocating embrace of the man who'd sworn to love her until death. But death, as Lincoln would soon learn, is rarely the end. The call came at 3:17 a.m., shattering the stillness of the night shift. "Code Blue, room 402. Code Blue." Nurses came running, their squeaking shoes leaving scuff marks on polished floors. They found Lincoln slumped in a chair, his face buried in trembling hands. "I woke up and she wasn't breathing," he sobbed, the picture of devastated grief. The medical team worked frantically, their efforts punctuated by shouted orders and the electric jolt of defibrillator paddles. But Danica was already gone. The doctor pronounced time of death with solemn finality, his eyes lingering on the faint bruises circling Danica's wrists. He said nothing. Not yet. But he noted it in the chart, just as he noted the way Lincoln's tears dried up the moment he thought no one was looking. With Danica cold in the morgue, Lincoln allowed himself one brief moment of relief before the next problem presented itself. Her sister Simone had started asking uncomfortable questions, showing up at the hospital demanding to see the body, pushing for an independent autopsy. And then there was Nathaniel, dear sweet Nathaniel, who'd been there the night of the accident and remembered things just a little too clearly. Lincoln invited his brother over for dinner the following Tuesday. He cooked Nathaniel's favorite meal, pot roast with carrots slow-cooked until they melted on the tongue. He even opened a bottle of their father's prized bourbon, the one they'd been saving for a special occasion. "To family," Lincoln toasted, watching closely as Nathaniel drained his glass. The poison worked quickly. Within 20 minutes, Nathaniel was sweating profusely, his hands clutching at his stomach. "Must be food poisoning," Lincoln suggested helpfully as he dialed 911, his voice the perfect blend of concern and panic. By the time paramedics arrived, Nathaniel was beyond saving. Lincoln played the grieving brother beautifully, his performance so convincing even the EMTs choked up. But one of them, a sharp-eyed veteran named Rodriguez, noticed two things: the untouched food on Lincoln's plate and the strange bitter smell clinging to Nathaniel's lips. He said nothing at the time, but like the doctor before him, he made a note. The pieces began falling into place with terrifying speed after that. The insurance investigator connected with the hospital staff. The toxicology report came back positive for ricin. And Simone, persistent Simone, hired a private pathologist who found petechial hemorrhages in Danica's eyes, the telltale signs of suffocation. When the police came for Lincoln, he was in the middle of Sunday service, his sermon reaching its crescendo. "And the Lord said, 'Vengeance is mine,'" he thundered, spit flying from his lips. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists right there at the pulpit, his congregation gasping as their beloved pastor was led away in disgrace. The trial was a spectacle. The prosecution laid out their case with surgical precision. The insurance fraud, the staged accident, Danica's murder, Nathaniel's poisoning. They painted Lincoln as a man who viewed human life as currency, his moral compass broken beyond repair. The defense tried to claim insanity, but Lincoln's meticulous planning betrayed him at every turn. This was no crime of passion. This was cold, calculated slaughter. When the prosecutor asked the fatal question, "Did you ever love your wife, or was she just a paycheck to you?" the entire courtroom held its breath. Lincoln said nothing, just stared straight ahead, his expression as blank as the Bible he'd so often misquoted. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach their verdict. As the judge handed down 2 consecutive life sentences, Lincoln finally spoke. Not to apologize, not to beg for mercy, but to quote scripture, his voice booming through the courtroom like the hypocrite he'd always been, "The wages of sin is death." The irony was lost on no one, least of all the guards who led him away to a cell where no congregation would ever hang on his words again. And somewhere, in the quiet of a cemetery where 2 fresh graves lay side by side, One could almost hear the faintest sigh of justice finally served. The steel door clanged shut behind Lincoln Frasier with a sound like final judgment. Inside his cell, the man who once commanded entire congregations now sat alone with nothing but his thoughts and the echoes of his crimes. No more Sunday sermons. No more collection plates being passed in his honor. No more wife to manipulate or brother to betray. Just 4 concrete walls and the unshakable knowledge that this right here, was where his story ended. So what do you think? Was there always something broken inside Lincoln Frasier, some fundamental piece missing from his soul? Or did the slow erosion of greed and entitlement wear away whatever goodness might have once existed? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, in that dangerous gray area where ordinary men convince themselves that terrible things are justified if the prize is valuable enough. This has been the tragic tale of Pastor Lincoln Frasier. But don't think for a moment it's an uncommon one. Next week, we'll examine another case where respectability masked monstrosity. Another reminder that predators don't always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes they sit beside us in pews. Sometimes they share our beds. Sometimes they smile as they reach for the pillow. Until then, lock your doors. Hug your loved ones. And remember, the most dangerous monsters are the ones we never see coming. If you found this story important, share it. Let more people see what really happens. And if you want to hear more true crime cases like this, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories out there, some waiting to be told, others still unfolding. This was Vic's True Crime Stories. See you next time.